Today's Take 5 with the Saints, April 18th, is Deaconess Emily Cooper, who became the founder of Home of the Innocents, an Episcopal church-affiliated organization in Louisville, Kentucky that took care of the needs of poor and neglected children in the Louisville community. And to this day, Home of the Innocents, now as a nonprofit organization, remains not only one of the largest charitable organizations for children in Louisville, but also in that whole region of the United States. And it was the vision and the administrative capabilities of Deaconess Emily Cooper that helped make that possible and carried on the legacy that continues today with this organization. The scripture that goes with her feast day comes out of Matthew chapter 18, verses 10 through 14. Jesus said, "Take care that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I tell you, in heaven their angels continually see the face of my Father in heaven. What do you think? If a shepherd has 100 sheep, and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that never went astray. So it is not the will of your Father in heaven that one of these little ones should be lost." Don't know a whole lot about Emily Cooper's early life, but what we do know about her was that she became very much called to the burgeoning deaconess movement in the Episcopal Church. For the longest time, even only men could serve as priests, but for the longest time, even only men could serve as deacons. But that movement changed because the diaconal ministry was recognized as being something that women not only were suited for, but also was a very appropriate ministry, particularly for those who were called to the ministry of serving the care and serving for the needs of the poor and neglected in any community. So Emily Cooper, who felt called to the role of being a deaconess, was ordained at St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Brooklyn in 1873. But shortly thereafter, she came to the attention of the Bishop of Kentucky, Benjamin Bosworth Smith, who, like most growing American cities at that time, were also dealing with the problem of what to do with growing lower-class populations, many of whom were not receiving living wages from their jobs. Their children, as a result, were either suffering because there just wasn't enough money, or kids were being orphaned because one or more of their parents were killed in industrial accidents, and simply the needs were growing and growing. And Bishop Smith saw that in Louisville these needs were getting out of control, and through some indirect way of finding out about Emily Cooper, he reached out to her and called her to come serve as a deacon in the Diocese of Kentucky. And as she worked and got to know the communities that which she'd serve, the working class populations of Louisville, and in particular their children, she decided that there needed to be a home to provide organized services and ministry for the children in need. And as such, in 1880, the Diocese of Kentucky founded the Home of the Innocents and appointed Sister Emily Cooper as its first director. The initial and still the major mission of the home today was to save small children who were suffering from neglect, disease, abandonment, and those whose parents simply could not afford their upkeep. One of the first things that became part of the Home of the Innocents was that it established the first kindergarten in the state of Kentucky. She continued to serve as the director of Home of the Innocents until her retirement. She also lived at the orphanage of the Good Shepherd until her death. During that time in which she oversaw these organizations, she assisted the bishops of Kentucky in baptizing 284 children, but also, unfortunately, burying an even larger number. You can imagine in a ministry in which you're taking care of those who are with a multiplicity of needs, that while some of the children are able to rise up out of those situations, a number of them were not. And so whether she was able to help them, she also spent time caring for the needs of her children who were sick and their families. and, not to be taken for granted, providing burials for these children, something that was quite an expensive endeavor back then, as it is today, and giving them a place to which even some of these children who were unnamed because they were orphans, who nobody could trace who their parents were and nobody knew what their histories were. A lot of these children who were buried were unnamed children, given names by Sister Emily, but often without any sort of legal record to remind them that they actually existed. Over 220 children who died while in the care of the Home of the Innocents were buried in unmarked graves in Louisville's Cave Hill Cemetery, many of these graves surrounding the grave of Sister Emily when she died somewhat after that. When money was raised in future years to erect a statue of Sister Emily, one of the things that was bargained for as part of this statue was to create bronze plaques of each of the children's names who were buried there, even if they didn't have a legal name, whatever the name that they were given by Sister Emily or by one of the people working at Home of the Innocents. These names were put on that plaque as a reminder not just of those children, but of all the lives that Sister Emily touched, those whose lives she was able through her faith to help bring up out of poverty, and those that she ministered to in spite of the fact that they still could not make it and passed away. The work of a deacon is exemplified immensely in the life of Sister Emily Cooper in giving up all that she had to serve the needy, particularly the needs of the children who were often forgotten in many cities and towns of 19th century urban and rural America. So, thank you for joining me. Tomorrow our saint of the day is Saint Alphege, and look forward to being with you then. Take care.